This is gonna go a lot slower than you guys because you talk very fast, the journalists. I'm just gonna start talking. My name's Edel Rodriguez. I'm an illustrator, and I lately been doing a lot of magazine covers that are being called viral magazine covers. It started off when I did something for on Newsweek, probably about 2 years ago, and then I started doing some other magazine covers for Time magazine on the Trump presidency. And after those, Der Spiegel started hiring me on a regular basis to do covers for them. And what I want to talk about is partly how those covers came about, and I guess to some degree what makes a viral magazine cover. Let's see. Most of my work starts from where I was born. I was born in Havana, Cuba, and I grew up with a lot of the graphics of the revolution kind of influencing me as a child. I came to the United States when I was 8 years old on the Mariel boat lift, and landed in Miami. Actually landed in Key West, then went to Miami. And I think it was that experience of having grown up in Cuba, having kind of being in the middle of politics at a very young age that made me wonder why that happened to me, why the Mariel boat lift happened, why my family was split apart, and things of that sort. So from a very young age, I became interested in politics, journalism, and kind of like the idea of combining graphics and journalism at the same time. I'm trying to find my freaking slides right now. So I was saying, this is where I grew up. I grew up in Havana, Cuba. This is me as a child. I pretty much wanted to be a baseball player, but I was not very good at any of that kind of stuff. And I grew up with the graphics of the revolution, Castro, both Raúl and Fidel, and things like tanks. We used to have military parades come through town on a regular basis, and these are the kind of things that even when I was 6, 7 years old, I would draw. These are some of the billboards that were around my town, and I think the graphics of the revolution, even though they were being done for propaganda purposes, sort of got ingrained in my head as what makes powerful imagery, how you communicate to people that maybe are not intellectuals, they're poor, they're farmers, things of that sort. This is me in my school uniform. We were all raised to be pioneers for the revolution, and these are the kind of images that we saw on television. But this is also the kind of stuff that made my parents want me to get the hell out of there at a very young age. They didn't like that their kids were being taken by the revolution. This is me at my pioneer induction ceremony. So there was something happening that they could sense that the children were not really their children anymore, that the government was trying to take them in some way. But for a kid, I was very fascinated by it. So here I am dressed in my uncle's military uniform, which I think is what the government was trying to do. At some point, my father got his hands on some foreign magazines, and he wallpapered the entire back of the house in magazine advertising. So these are spreads from magazines, and that was the first time that I saw foreign things and foreign advertising. I think that had a lot of influence in me. Some other influences were Cuban graphics, Cuban posters, political posters. movie posters, this is another political poster which is well known in Cuba, which is Jesus Christ as a revolutionary. These, to me, this is a pretty controversial image. So these are the kind of images that I grew up with. This is my entire family at the farm, and I think within a year, almost everybody in that photograph had left for the United States. This is a photograph from the Mariel boat lift. I'm the little kid in the red coat. So this is when we came over from Cuba. And this is my family on the boat coming over in 1980. This is some video footage of the Mariel boat lift.
Some 125,000 Cubans came to America on mostly chartered boats.
That man there that yelled "Down with Fidel," that's my father. So from him I got this idea to yell out, and that's what he did when he finally landed in the United States. He yelled out, "Abajo Fidel." So I grew up with my dad kind of telling me these stories that, if you don't like something, speak up, say something about it. When I went to college at Pratt in Brooklyn, I worked at the school newspaper, and this is the first time I had kind of a direct job as some kind of journalist. For the most part, I did illustrations. So this is one of my first illustrations on sexual harassment on campus for the Prattler. And I started getting more interested in the graphics of the paper than in writing for it. I became very interested in cover design and doing cover illustrations and cover graphics for the school newspaper. I also did some writing, some journalism. So on my first trip back to Cuba, I wrote this story and I did all the photographs for it. So it was like 6 pages in the school newspaper about what I saw was happening in Cuba at the time, because I was at Pratt Institute and art school, and basically all my teachers were revolutionaries and loved Cuba so much, and I felt like I had to write something to say, no, it's not really what you think it is. So I wrote this story for the school newspaper. And through that, some of my early visits back to Cuba, I began to do a lot of drawings about Cuba and illustrations, landscapes, scenes that I saw in my hometown. So this is one of the murals, and this is our local park, which was covered in murals, about the revolution and things like that. This is my first cover for Time magazine. So I did this, I think when I was 23 years old. I started working at Time magazine as a designer, and just by being on staff, they're like, hey, we need a cover, you want to do it? No, I'm 23, what are you doing? And they liked my work, and I would go home at the end of the day on a Thursday, and then by Friday, I had to do a final cover art for Time magazine. So these are my first covers for Time magazine were done because I was working there as a designer, and that's how it came about. This is a later cover for Newsweek magazine. Once I had left Time magazine around 2008, Newsweek started calling me, and I began to do some covers for Newsweek, and also for the Village Voice. This is on coyotes taking people across the border. This is to show a little bit of process of how I do a cover. So when Bin Laden got killed, I had 2 days to finish a cover for Newsweek, and these were my 4 sketches. This is my pencil drawing for the cover, and then the painting, the final painting that I did, and then this is the final as a full cover with background and everything. So all of that was in basically 2 days time. I became very good at processing the news, figuring out a concrete, strong image, and turning it around within a day, 2 days. For the op-ed page at the New York Times, I do things in about 3 or 4 hours. I've done probably like 100 op-eds by now. This is on violence in America. This is on, I think, on hate groups, quieting down hate groups. Something on the Ebola virus, This is the cover for The Nation that I did after the shootings in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub. And something recent on Aleppo. And this is something for Wired magazine on internet warfare. And something for the New York Times on spying on journalists within the country of Iran. And I also do some fun things. So this is a portrait of David Bowie for The Hollywood Reporter. A portrait of Chavez. And I've also done, I think, about 40 different book covers. So this was part of a series of science fiction book covers, Cuban science fiction. And some theater posters as well. I've done work for Broadway shows and other operas around the country, things like that. And I think my first pre-Twitter controversy came when I did this cover back in 2005. I was asked to do a cover on Cuban, for an issue on Cuban design, and I was featured inside the magazine along with a lot of other Cuban designers. And I came up with this idea, basically, because at the time, I was traveling to Cuba, and instead of, in the past, people had asked me for food and sort of the basics. And then when I was going that time, they're like, can you bring us some Nike shoes and some, an iPod? And I thought, well, that's strange. Like, these things have changed. Not just, can you bring me some shoes? Now it's going to have some Nikes. So I thought this idea of how brands take over, where American brands and also the Cuban brand, in a way, Che had become a brand by then, because if you went to the airport, they were selling a ton of merchandise with Che's image on it. So I figured out a way to combine these two. And then it just got in a bunch of blogs in about 2005, and a lot of people started arguing basically about this image for a very long time. And it also, it was taken into Cuba at some point, and people were starting passing it around Havana inside bags because it was this was very wrong to do this to the portrait of Che in Havana. Then the next cover that I did that was in the news a lot was this one about what Silicon Valley thinks of women, and it was about sexual harassment in Silicon Valley. But as you can see, everyone was freaking out about the Newsweek cover. She wanted to throw it in the trash, so it became, yeah, she's literally holding it up on the Today Show and wanting to throw it in the trash because she felt it was sexist. And then the next segment was Miley Cyrus grinding up on people. So it's this weird where I was actually talking about the issue and Miley was just doing her thing. So that took me by surprise. I started getting a lot of direct messages and feedback. And actually, this was 2 years ago, and it's still going on. Like MTV, whenever they're doing some story on issues of women in the media, they're like, "Oh, can we interview you?" And we're like, "Sure, I'll interview." And then they take my interview, and it totally makes me look like a sexist misogynist again. So, but the interesting thing about that story, the question that kept coming up is, couldn't you have come up with some other image? I'm like, yeah, I had about 15 other options, actually, when I sent it to Newsweek magazine. But of all these 15 different ideas, there was actually a female art director that said, I love that one, that's genius. We want to do that. I'm like, oh, okay. So I as an illustrator, you're working together as a team with an art director and editor. It's not like I just can, on my own, decide I want to publish this on the cover of Newsweek. I send ideas, we talk about it, and as a team, we decide what's going to get people's attention, which it did. I think my main focus is to get people to pay attention and to start a conversation, okay? And I think that's what this image did. You got people talking, and I think an entire week about sexual harassment in the workplace. So. An example of what is happening? Something that I thought was going to cause a problem was this cover that I did for The Crisis, which was on black crime. And I thought, wow, this is pretty strong. I think there could be an issue with the way I'm portraying black people. It didn't register, didn't make a difference. So. And another cover that I was very nervous about was this cover when the U.S. and Cuba began relations again. I thought I'd hear back from a lot of people, and nothing happened. So it's very hard to determine. These are some images to show that a lot of my imagery is generally pretty strong and graphically, using weapons and things of that sort. So to me, I paint and draw and make imagery about war, death. I use machetes. I do all sorts of things. And this is an entire painting I did on the Syrian war. So I'm constantly kind of immersed in that imagery. And the problem comes when I use it in a commercial way or in a magazine cover or something that's a little bit more visible, then something happens. So this is a series of images that I did on ISIS and on terrorism. This is I saw a guy on TV taking a selfie of himself with a beheaded head behind him. And so I think it was about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, I did this entire series about ISIS, kind of taking images and going a little bit extreme on them. I came up with this idea, what if a terrorist wears an I Love New York t-shirt? And then I made a poster, and I started putting posters out in Times Square and things like that. This is when Obama started bombing ISIS and bringing hope to them. This is right when people were doing the bucket challenge. I was sick of the bucket challenge, so I did this as an image. And I started putting these images on the internet, on all my social media feeds, and they started getting passed around quite a bit, actually. That's one of the things that has changed, and this was at Thanksgiving. So one of the things that have changed is this idea that I can do whatever I want, put it out there, and then the editors at the magazines or the newspapers, like the New York Times, see what I do, and they're like, hey, we want that. We want you to do that for us. Whereas before, they probably wouldn't have taken that jump or that risk if they hadn't seen it already gain some approval online. This is when I started making posters of my images and putting them around the city. This is in Chelsea. This is in Times Square. And the funny thing with what changes when you go out into the street is that you start, I started putting things up. I started seeing how people were kind of like next to them or interacting with them and taking pictures of people. But I also thought, well, police could come here and think that I'm supporting terrorism by putting up these posters around town. So it does change. You don't have that protection of a magazine or a little bit of distance. You're there putting up a poster, and police are walking by, and Spider-Man's there. So I started using these Times Square characters as part of some of the photographs that I was taking with my posters. Then some other things that I've had that I've done are conceptual installations around town, and I've done these as ideas and submitted them to museums and things like that, and none of them have been picked up yet, though. But there's hope. This is an idea for water towers. And then I had a show in the Bronx Uh, and this is the poster that I made. So this happened about 2 years ago. And this was the start of the image that comes later that this is the image that it was referencing. At some point, I started figuring out a combination of what was happening in terrorism, ISIS, in the news, and what was happening in the United States. So I began changing terrorism images. So the terrorist images became like white Klansmen images, and the guys with the red hats that make America great again. Because I felt that in some way they were the two sides of the same coin. They were doing the same thing. They were being extremists. So the vocabulary and the images that I was doing changed from terrorism to politics and to the election. And the idea that terrorists like ISIS and Klansmen have, at the end of the day, both wanted someone like Trump to win because it's good for all of them. It's good for extremism. So I started combining these images, Klan and terrorists go shopping. My first assignment to do a portrait of Donald Trump came from Politico magazine about right at the beginning of the primaries. So I did this one. Then I started making some images of my own. This is when he said that there's no problem down there. It's an elephant. Then I started seeing Trump just like everywhere, So I saw a dog sign and I said, "Oh, this looks like Trump." Then during the debates, I started doing images right before the debate happened and put them online. So it was kind of like my prediction of what was going to happen at the debate. And then they started getting shared around as the debate was happening. So this is a series that I did, one before every debate. Because I really felt it was like that. It was like a shithead, debating a professional person. This is when the tape came out. They said he was like an octopus. And then at that point, I was doing like one image of Trump a day, basically. This was during the primary. And the people that I know at Time Magazine, I've worked with them over many years. They're like, "Hey, we love this stuff you're doing with Trump. We're doing a magazine, an issue this week about what's happened to him because it was in August. He had said all sorts of nasty things, and they had the title already. They said we're going to say meltdown, and we're thinking of doing something with his face. And I said, okay, I have an idea, and I did my sketches. These are the 6 sketches, and they end up liking the first one, and that became the first Time magazine cover, which is called Meltdown. And that came out in August of last year, August 2016. And it went all over the news. Let's see. This is a little bit of an animation of it. This shows how it appeared in the news. It was on NBC. This woman painted it on her nails and sent me a picture. It was a Morning Joe and all that. Then about 2 months later, they called me that they wanted to do kind of the GOP melting because the whole GOP looked like it was going to, So I did this one, but then at the last minute they pulled it. They didn't want to run this one. They said they wanted to run another Trump cover, but absolutely smashed. So I did. This is my initial sketch. Because this is at the point where the tape had come out where he had been talking about grabbing women and all of that. So they wanted to show that was the end. It really felt like it was the end. And I did this. And then the final cover, these were 2 options. And this was the final cover, which was called Total Meltdown.
So Nancy, so
I love it.
what was the editorial
It's
decision to do this?
Well, this has been true all year, where we say it can't get worse, it can't get lower, nothing can fall apart, and then
Wow.
it gets worse. But this week, where he himself is talking about a scorched earth to the mattresses kind of campaign, it really is like nothing we've seen. The meltdown is not only him; it's his party. It is the open warfare. 3 weeks in front of an election. It is impossible to get your head around in historical terms, quite apart from in real time.
Alex, any evidence that he had no choice but to basically go?
So since those two covers got so much attention, I started making, I thought, I'm going to make posters. And I started making very big posters, about 40 inches tall, and taking them around town. Because I think this was about 2 weeks before the election. So I started taking them around town, taking photographs, putting them online. This is at the Trump International downtown. I just went to the coffee table and dropped one there and left. I don't know what happened to it. I was down at the golf course in Miami. I dropped a couple there too on the grass. Then I went to Times Square and all these characters again. The people underneath the costumes are all from Central America or Mexico, so we got into some really great conversations about immigration and things of that sort. I didn't have to pay them. They're like, yeah, I hate him. Then right before the election, Der Spiegel called me with they wanted to do a cover about this threat that was coming to the world. We didn't really know what was going to happen, so they wanted a cover that was going to be both ways. Either he loses or he wins. And I came up with this idea of kind of a comet heading towards Earth, the first one. And that's what they ended up doing as the final cover. And that became, it was all over the internet again. And now actually when he announced his Paris Accord changes, it came back and people started sharing it all over again. And through all of this, right when he got inaugurated, there was the Women's March, and I created this image for the Women's March and put it online, along with all of my work. I put it online. I said, you can take it, you can make posters, do whatever you want with my work, and bring it to the protest. So I started getting all these photographs back of people using my work at the Women's March. This was some of the sketches I did for Time Magazine, and this was a cover for Time Magazine that was never ran. They ran the Pink Cat instead. Then this happened. So I was watching the news, and I saw that when the Muslim ban was announced, I started seeing a lot of clips on TV of people at the airport that were not being allowed into the country. They were little kids, like 8 or 9 years old. There was one kid that was kind of caught in this in between, like, do they send him back to Iran, or does he come see his parents here? There was a woman from another country that was coming for an operation, and they didn't let her in. So I was really pissed off about what was going on, and to me, I had always grown up with the idea that it was the Cuban government or communism or Castro that kept families apart, that did this kind of stuff. And I couldn't believe that it was happening in the United States, that this country was splitting people and not allowing immigrants to move, things like that. So I really thought of it as some sort of terrorism. So I took this image that I had done earlier on ISIS, and I put Trump's head on it, and put the Statue of Liberty on there, like he had beheaded democracy. And I put it online, and it got shared all over the place. It went everywhere. At the same time, Der Spiegel had reached out to me and said, we want to do a story on the Muslim ban. And I said, okay. And I sent them about 10 or 12 ideas, different variations, a little bit safer. I heard back from them and said, no, nothing's working. I said, okay. And I went back to my sketchbook and was doing another lecture. In the middle of the lecture, the art director messaged me and had seen this image on my Twitter account, and she said, "Can we use that on our cover?" I said, "Are you crazy?" No, you really want to do that? And they're like, "Yeah, we love it. We want to do it. We just want to change it, and we want to make him in a full Trump suit. And can you do those changes for tomorrow?" I said, "Okay." So I went back home and I finished the cover. And this was the first time actually in past covers I didn't think they were that big. I didn't expect the replies in past covers I did. This is the first time I told a friend. I said, "Hey, I think something's going to happen with this thing." So I did it, and this was the cover that came out, the Der Spiegel cover, and it was immediate. Within like 5 minutes, everybody was calling me. Like the Washington Post was calling, the New York Times, BuzzFeed. I think I did about 40 different interviews on the radio and 10 like film crews that came to my studio to do stories on me, and it was also, it's been the highest selling cover for Der Spiegel. So they usually sell about 200,000 copies. This one so far has sold like 1 million copies, and they're still printing them, so they're still available. To some degree, when I was working at Time Magazine, I always felt that we were always not going all the way on a lot of things. You always have to think of the subscribers and this, that, the other. And what I really liked about this cover is that, and what it did and how it sold, is that you're taking a risk. But you're doing something that feels honest. That's direct from the artist. It was really direct from me. There were no editors, art directors, anybody changing it. And you see that there's an audience for that. I don't know why we're so cautious, so regularly. And I always felt that cautiousness is what caused a lot of newspapers to kind of like fade, because people want something a little bit more real than what we're serving up. Let's see what this is.
Its latest cover. It's an illustration of US President Donald Trump beheading the Statue of Liberty, as you can see there. An editorial on its English language site implores Germany to take. I want to bring up, if we can, to my producers, that cover again of the Spiegel that you have of President Trump beheading the Statue of Liberty. Do you still stand by that cover? Have you had to apologize? Will you apologize for that?
No, why should I? I mean, it's an artwork showing a person, obviously Donald Trump, beheading a symbol, and that's the symbol of democracy. It's the symbol of freedom. The Statue of Liberty has.
And also within a day, it was showing up on large posters at the Stonewall Inn. People were bringing it to the magazine wasn't even out yet, and people were printing posters off the internet. And they were showing up in protests all over the country. One thing that I also did like from the editor is at no time did they back down. They just said, "Yeah, that's what we did." Okay? There's no apology or any of that kind of stuff. So as an artist, it feels great to have that. This was in San Francisco. Yeah, the worst thing you'd want is someone to come out with "Oh, we're sorry that we did this" or whatever. But in some ways, it's become kind of like the iconic image of what's happening now. Charlie Hebdo did a dishonor for me. They did Merkel beheading her opponent, because it's Charlie Hebdo. I would never do that. And the other thing that's come up is the idea that whether I'm American and that I'm a closet communist or something. This is a picture of when I got hired at Time Magazine, and they said, "Where do you want your picture taken?" And I said, "I want to take it at the Statue of Liberty." So this was in 1994. There's been a lot of articles, and people have said all sorts of things. My work was on Breitbart for like a week, so I got a lot of friendly email. And in terms of where the imagery comes from, I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. I love beheadings. I love imagery of beheadings. I grew up around my grandmother cutting heads off chickens and goats. I think that for me, it's a normal thing to happen. And I think in this culture, we eat our chicken like at the restaurant. So using machetes is something that I've done for a long time, because I grew up around machetes in Cuba. So these are some past drawings of mine. This is from like 1996. This is from 1996 too. this is my friend from my town, and another friend a drawing of a friend cutting a chicken's head off. So. And the idea that beheading is not such a distant thing. It's been used in Renaissance paintings and sculptures. This is a painting by Goya. So these are very memorable images, and the idea that we have to tone things down or make it more palatable, I don't think that was what Goya was thinking about when he painted this. He just painted what he wanted to paint, which is what I do. This is also an etching by Goya, a painting by Dali. This is a Leon Golub painting of integration. And the idea that we can play with imagery like the Statue of Liberty. These are posters, famous posters from the 70s by Tommy Ungerer. These are symbols, okay? The Statue of Liberty is a symbol, a beheading is a symbol. These are ways to tell stories. And also the idea that I would never do this in Cuba. Well, you know, I was in Cuba. This is a painting I did on a wall that would not, they wouldn't like me painting someone on a boat leaving the island, but I wanted to do it, so I did it. And when I had my show in Cuba, this is the poster that I did for the show. I never told anybody about it there, but the name Nature Boy comes from the name of the boat that I left on. And that's what I did. And this is the latest one for the Spiegel. And it's Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump on a nuclear bomb. So that's it.
Thank you, Edel. I'm pretty sure we have a lot of people interested in asking some questions. Where do you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Given your love of beheadings, I'm quite curious to hear your take on the Kathy Griffin.
Oh, okay.
You know, holding the Trump head, and also like with that, at what point is there a line that we shouldn't cross, and is there a difference between a drawing and a photograph where it's just much more vivid?
Yeah, she's asking about the thing that happened with Kathy Griffin and the photograph of her and Sarah Line. What you have to do, and what I do with all my images, is you find some sort of like a safeguard, like some way to make an image that is kind of like criticism proof or something. So for example, in what she did, where's the idea? What's the concept? There's nothing there, okay? She's not an artist, she's a comedian. I'm not a comedian, I'm not gonna go stand up and tell a joke at the improv. So she was trying to make an image, but it didn't quite work, okay? It was very bloody, very real, okay? One thing that she could have done is if she dressed as the Statue of Liberty, that would have given the image some sort of concept, something that changed what was going on, okay? But she didn't do that. It was basically like a promo shot for herself, which backfired, I think. Yes, the other thing is a photo versus a drawing makes a big difference, okay? I probably wouldn't have made that image as a photograph. I did it as a drawing. There are things you can do as a drawing. This is called graphics. This is visual imagery. This is what we do. This is what art directors do, is decide, you have an idea, how are you going to handle that idea? An idea can be handled 5 different ways, and you're going to get 5 different emotions, 5 different feedback from your audience. So the way I do things and the way I make imagery, you can tell that is not Donald Trump. That's a drawing of Donald Trump. The Statue of Liberty doesn't bleed. It's made out of copper. So I made it bleed, but it's still kind of like graphic blood. It's not the same thing as what she did in my opinion. So that's why there was so much blowback to her and not so much to what I did. And I have an idea that if he gets impeached, I will flip the situation, and it will be the Statue of Liberty holding his head. Okay? I had that idea right. When I did this one, when I did that one, I told the editors, hey, if he gets impeached, this is what I'm going to do. And they're like, we were thinking the same thing. So, but I will do it in such a way that I will get away with it, and people will understand what I'm saying. And one thing that I say is that I try to communicate to you guys who are highly educated journalists, and also to my farmer grandfather who has no education. So to me, the magical image is something that I can make like this. I've shown that to anybody in my family that doesn't understand graphics, to people in other countries, and they're like, yeah, I get that, you know. And I think that's what you have to do. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a quick question about intellectual property, because you've obviously have let your art be shared all over the world.
Right.
What's the balance? I mean, because it seems like social media helps you, but does it hurt you as well? Like in terms of your intellectual like creativity, like where do you stand on people sharing things? You seem pretty transparent. I'm just curious.
Yeah, in my usual work, it's my work. I don't want people to sell it or things of that sort. Generally, people get in touch with me for permissions to use things on book covers, you know, like commercial purposes. Even some people ask me, hey, can I use this as my profile page? I'm like, yeah, sure, you can do that. That's in normal circumstances. But I don't think we're in normal circumstances. I really do think that there's kind of a weird propaganda war going on. And Trump has his propaganda, and you have to fight that with something strong or stronger. And I just said, hey, anybody wants to do this? We're fighting here. Here's the weapons, use them. Because I don't think this is normal time. I really do think you have to fight someone that is such a jerk by being a jerk back. So.
Hi, Mr. Rodriguez. I'm originally from France, so I've seen your covers all over the place. And we're used to, you know, Charlie Hebdo and all those types of magazines. Nudity is normal in France and throughout Europe. And we Europeans usually see America as being obsessed with religion, and that kind of has a toll on what can be shown on TV and on magazines and what cannot be. So under this new president, do you think that you as illustrators will have a harder time having your artistic work portrayed in the media and around the country?
No, I mean, I really, I don't see that at all. I really do see as all of us working together to end this hell that we're going through. I see editors are getting active, reporters are writing, everybody's doing their part to actually inform people as to what's going on and to talk about the danger of it. From the very beginning, I just really saw it as a danger that we're in the middle of. I grew up in a country where people were afraid to talk. I grew up in a country where people would say, shh, don't say that, shh, don't say that, okay? So last year, in the middle of the primaries, I was talking to someone and like, shh, don't say that. I think they like Trump. I'm like, whoa, why are you doing that here? Why are you saying that to me here? And it really set me off, and it made me feel like people were dividing into their own sides and don't talk to this person or that. And that to me is extremely dangerous. And I think when you have something that scary, instead of being quiet about it, what I decided to do is yell about it and say, hey, look at this thing, look at that thing, this is ridiculous, so that people feel comfortable talking about it, so that people wouldn't be scared to talk about what's happening themselves. So when I make an image and someone makes it, prints it out and takes it to a protest, it kind of empowers people to speak out, because the worst thing that could happen is for people to be quiet and to just let things happen. And this country is very, very, has a long history of, hey, if everything's going cool, if the stock market's going fine and the trains are running, we'll just, re-elect this person again. And that can't happen, so.
Muchísimas gracias, Edel.
Okay.